to have you with us today. And nice to have you. And we're really thrilled to have the Teccos with us today, Steve and Bonnie. And I don't know when the last time we've had a visit together, but it was a while because of COVID and other stuff. They had to reschedule. But they haven't been here when we have the new kitchen. So they saw the new kitchen. So that's how long ago it's been. And they live down in West Wildwood?
Wildwood Crest.
Wildwood Crest, that's right. Wildwood Crest. Very lovely hotel that they have and they manage and take care of. And great place to come if you want to have a little time away. Get in touch with them and go down and see them. But you want to put on your walking shoes because the beach is from here to the center of town. It's a wide beach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wide beach, which is nice. Okay, let's get started. Father, I thank you so much that you have this time together to minister one with another and to see friends that we haven't seen for a while and to renew understanding of mission and their work in the Czech Republic. Thank you for that, for all the years that they have been involved and for all that they do. In Jesus' name, amen. How long have you been involved in the Czech Republic?
35 years.
35 years. Okay, come on up and let us know everything you got for us there.
Thank you. 35 years. Yep, I started when I was 9. So don't you dare think, oh, he must be old. Yes, as Pastor said, it's been a while since I've been here, but you have so many wonderful memories in my heart. Truly, it is a joy to be back with you. And since it has been a while, and some of you may not know me, remember me, want to remember me, I thought I'd share just a little bit of background as far as who I am and then how we ended up being introduced to one another. But I first and foremost want to thank you for the years of partnership with me in the work in what used to be called Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic. I started recording on the computer all the donations that would come into the ministry back in 2001. And just for fun, I went back and in the month of January, list them, of course, throughout the year. There was community at the time, Baptist Church. And so even before then, you were investing through me in the work of the Czech Republic. And that is a stewardship of trust that Bonnie and I don't take lightly. We realize that there's a lot of folks that you could be partnering with that are doing good work, and you have been such a blessing to me, and we really appreciate that. So I bring you greetings from Pastor Marek. Some of you with longer memories may remember. Pastor Marek was here. He was the pastor that told the story that after the revolution took place in Eastern Europe, in specifically Czechoslovakia, he was invited to England to preach. Now, Marek taught himself English, and so as Marek describes his English, he says his English is not so quite well. So if you want to pick up that phrase, that's a Marekism, and as you use it, you could think of the work in the Czech Republic and pray. You know, something is not so quite well. Well, his English was not so quite well. But he did really, comparatively speaking, for me learning Czech, he did very well for teaching himself, right? So he goes to England and he found some very fancy bubble bath soap for his wife. And he said he picked up the envelope and he knew it was very fancy because it had flowers, and so he bought this. At the time in the Czech Republic, they didn't The bubble bath and some of these things were just not available. Or if they were certainly hard to find. So he brought that back for his wife, Yanni, and she was very excited to receive it. And as soon as she got this envelope, the tub was turned on and the envelope was opened, and all of a sudden he heard Marichko. And in Czech, when you get that name, you know that something is wrong. So he was a little alarmed and went in, and he said he noticed floating in the tub were tiny little vegetables. And he looked at the envelope and he said, "Oh, I didn't buy soap, I bought soup." So he told that story in the morning service that he was here, maybe the Sunday school hour, and that night he preached again, and Pastor Jim said, "We have two presentations for you tonight, Marek." There was a love offering, and the check was given to Marek. And then he said, "We have another presentation," and one of the ladies came up with a big box. And they went out that afternoon and purchased a number of these types of things for Yanni, and so he went home with soap and not soup. So when Mark heard I was coming, he said, "Please give many greetings." And so how did I get involved in the Czech Republic? And maybe the bigger question might be, how did I get involved with operating a motel? This is sort of a strange missionary speaker here today. How do these things come together? Well, I was actually an assistant pastor for 2 years at First Baptist in Toms River. And then from there, I was invited to establish a new church in Syracuse, New York. And I was there for about 8 years. We had a really encouraging little fellowship. We were growing. And at the time, there was a man from Czechoslovakia who had a number of contacts in his country. He operated, he was a businessman in New York, in Syracuse area. And so from time to time, he would host Czech pastors that would come over. This was when Czechoslovakia, of course, was communist. So he would call area pastors and say, "Pastor so-and-so is coming from Czechoslovakia. Would you like to hear an update of what God is doing behind the Iron Curtain?" So whenever he called, our church was very interested. We wanted to know more so that we could pray more effectively. So he would come with this Czech pastor, and then he would be what he called the interrupter, okay? Not the interpreter, the interrupter. The brother would begin speaking Czech, and then Lou would sort of halfway through his sentence begin to translate. So he was the interrupter. And each pastor over the years that came from Czech, and we had about, I would say maybe 5, would leave and they would extend to me the same invitation. And that invitation was, "Now we've come to visit you and your church. Now we would like to extend an invitation to you to come and visit in our church." And of course, back in the communist regime, the thought of that was a bit scary, to be honest with you. I don't want you to think, because I smuggled Christian literature behind the Iron Curtain, that I'm one of those heroes of the faith, okay? Far from it. I've worked with people that were truly heroes of the faith, but me, you're looking at the Don Knotts of the Christian church, okay? You've heard of The Shakiest Gun in the West, one of Don Knotts' movies. I was the shakiest Bible in the East. So, but when I listened to this invitation, I had to respond like a godly man, like a pastor, and I said, "Well, thank you, we must pray about this," right? when you don't want to do something, you could always, blame it on the Lord, right? God hasn't led me, dear brother, but we will pray about this. Well, to my shock and perhaps disappointment, on one occasion we did pray about this, and I sensed that God wanted me to go. And so I met with this gentleman. His name was Lou, and it was during the time when things were beginning to fall apart in Eastern Europe in terms of the communist domination. And he said to me, brother, he said, you must take literature with you because the churches desperately need it, and everything is getting through right now. Those who are taking literature in are sharing that their perspective in terms of their strict administration of their laws about bringing literature in, not just Christian literature, but in the old communist bloc of countries, no literature was permitted into the countries. And that's why at the border, if you're driving across the border, they would take as much as an hour and a half to examine every part of your vehicle. So, nonetheless, we were told at the time that material's getting in. So he loaded me up with material and many Gospels of John, small Bible tracts. They were all wrapped in Christmas wrapping paper. I'll never forget it. It was Happy Smurf Christmas wrapping paper. And so I went into Vienna and I met some missionaries there, stayed a few nights in Vienna with some of these brothers who would travel to these Eastern Bloc countries, and their home base was in Vienna. But then I got on the train and went across the border into Czechoslovakia. The guards came into my compartment. On my visa, it said that I was a teacher. If I said preacher, they would not grant me entrance into their country. So they looked at my visa, they looked at my luggage, and they said, open. And I thought, oh boy. My friend Lou back in the States said that everything was getting through. You're not supposed to be saying open. You're supposed to be saying, okay, go, fine, you're good. So my heart started to beat a little bit. Lou said to me, if they open some of your luggage, don't look anxious or be afraid, because sometimes these guards would actually look, as one of the other guards was searching the vehicle, one guard was actually looking at your facial expression to see if you have any anxiety developing or not. So he said to me, you could look a little confused because you're an American, you're not used to someone searching your luggage. He said, but don't look nervous. So I thought, at the time, we had 3 young children under the age of 6 at home. And so I usually had a confused look on my face most of the time I was around the house. So I thought, maybe God has gifted me as a smuggler, maybe I just am a natural at it. And so I tried to have that, expression like dads have, And then they found my packages and they said this, and I said, they're gifts. And they said, open. So I opened it and they looked at it and they found another and they looked at what was there, and he got on his radio and called, and before you know it, there were 4 more police officers in my little compartment. And they just gave me a bevy of questions as far as what am I doing here? They looked at my passport again, and I heard one of them say, teacher. And I thought, what now? I only had 1 lesson in smuggling. And so I didn't know, and sometimes people will say, as I've shared this story, wow, you must have a great faith in God to trust in this situation. And my answer is no. Really, when there's nothing else you can do, it's really easy to trust God. right? So I was saying, Lord, I don't understand why all this is happening, but you're in charge here. And so they took and confiscated most of my literature. They wanted me to get off the train at the next stop for a more thorough examination. I was throwing both barrels at them. I said, well, I thought that you had religious freedom here. I thought I'd kind of lay that on them, you know. And I think the guards were well equipped, because they came right back at me and they said, yes, we have religious freedom here, but you have enough to open a bookstore. And so to make a long story short, I was able to make my way to Prague, where I met my contact, and I felt terrible because the material that I had was in such need for the people of God there in Czechoslovakia. And I started telling my story to George, who I think understood maybe 1 out of every 10 words I said, and he just kept looking at me and smiling and nodding his head. And he said the first word that any Czech learns in English, and that is, no problem, no problem. Well, I didn't understand it then. I began to later understand when I discovered that when I got home, Lou said to me, you had good ministry in Czechoslovakia. And I said, well, Lou, could you explain to me what were the messages that hit home, in a sense, and the Lord used to encourage their hearts? And he said to me, no, he said, it wasn't what you said, it's what happened to you at the border. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, you know, Czechoslovakia and the church is a small community, and the word gets around very quickly. And there's not too many Americans that are willing to risk something for them and to minister to them. And people heard that you got stopped at the border and were interrogated, and they came out to hear what you had to say because you were willing to risk something for them. And I often wondered, I said, Lord, I don't understand. All the reports we were getting were that material was getting through. So why did I do a bad job? Did I do something wrong? Did my facial expression communicate the wrong thing? And I didn't know it then. I learned it a little bit later, that the Lord was setting up and establishing a ministry for me. Because after the fall of communism, the floodgates opened, and there were many pastors and Christian workers who wanted to go into what was now free Czechoslovakia, and these churches became overwhelmed, that's the word I was looking for, with so many people from the West who wanted to speak and meet in their churches. And finally, some of these churches, especially in Prague, began to say, we have to not permit as many missionaries and speakers. They want to come and they want to have their pictures taken, and some pastors were not at their pulpit for like months at a time. And then they would say this, but they would say, but Steve is always welcome. Not because I was more dynamic, not because I just communicated more effectively, but because I was willing to risk something for them at the border. And God was, in a sense, in a very real sense, establishing my ministry for me by that experience at the border. And I'll share a little bit more along that theme at the worship service. But when I got back, and Bonnie and I, through prayer, decided that we were going to leave the pastoral ministry. There were a number of conversations and a lot of prayer and anguish that led us to that conclusion. We decided that we would become tent makers, and that is to say the Apostle Paul was literally a tent maker. He was a self-supported missionary. And we decided that we were going to get involved in the family business and then travel back and forth to Czech Republic and try to raise money and minister and help the work in the Czech Republic. And it was a difficult decision. I had been to seminary. That was a 3.5-year process. There was a lot of time learning Greek and Hebrew and all those preparatory type classes so that I could serve as a pastor. I was serving as a pastor in a young church that was growing and sensed the hand of God on our ministry. There were some believers that thought that we were making the wrong decision. They told us flat out that we were selling out, but we really believed that this is what God was doing. And through the years, and I say this to the praise of the glory of God, literally millions of dollars have been donated to our ministry that have 100% been redirected toward building the church in the Czech Republic. And our focus has been in 3 areas. Early on, especially the area of literature, development and publication, and then leadership training, but then thirdly, and perhaps most excitedly from my perspective, was church planting. And it was through church planting with national Czech pastors that we have had a part of establishing, since the fall of communism, about 25 different new congregations in the Czech Republic. And that is to the praise of His glory. And again, there are certainly people out there that are more dynamic, that are more exciting, that write books. I haven't written any books, and yet God is showing how great He is by doing marvelous things through somebody, just a normal person like me. And I think of the words of William Carey, missionary to India, I believe, who made famous this expression. He said, "Attempt great things for God, expect great things from God." And that expression really has made an impact in my life and Bonnie's life as we've moved forward together. Once I was back, we would visit churches and share updates of what God was doing behind the Iron Curtain. I would go basically the months of November, January, and March. And then while I was here back in the States, 3 out of every 4 Sundays, I would be on the road visiting churches, and I would ask for a love offering, and whatever came in went to either open up Christian bookstores or to assist old buildings in being restored, because the Communist Party would often just take over a church building and say, well, we're going to give you this property instead. And it would be like a very small and rundown property with a leaky roof. And so these were the kinds of things that happened behind the Iron Curtain. So I got an invitation. Don't remember the specifics, but I got an invitation to come to a Central New Jersey pastoral fellowship. And I thought, as I'm driving up, I'm thinking, hot diggity dog, this this is just going to be great. I'm going to meet, 12, 14 pastors, and I'm going to share the story of what God is doing behind the Iron Curtain, and they're going to invite me to come to their church and to speak, and they're going to take love offerings, and we're going to be able to help this church in the city of Usti, and we're going to be able to help that church in the city of Chomatov, and this church in the city of Teplica. They have this situation, this church has that situation, and I had my calculator out. I was really excited. And that's where I met Pastor Jim. And it was an interesting afternoon. As I shared my story, one of the pastors said to me, I have a question. How do you justify bringing Bibles illegally into Czechoslovakia in light of Romans 13 when it says that we should be subject to the government authorities that are over us? Now, I don't want to say this pastor was cold, but I think when he opened his mouth, I saw a small light go on. And I'm driving home and I'm thinking, wow, boy, was that a bomb. And I'm not going to, nobody took their little, daytimer out at the time. Nobody had smartphones, they had, everything was on paper. These little books called daytimers. Some of you with longer memories may remember. Nobody took their daytimer out and said, are you available on the 14th? Are you available on this date? I thought, oh, well. And a couple days later, I got a phone call from Pastor Jim. And Pastor Jim said, I'd like to invite you up to our church and to share with us some of the things that you shared at the pastoral meeting. And when I came up here, I pulled into the parking lot, not knowing or not expecting anything in particular, and I thought, well, Lord, this is your work. And God through the years taught me many times, because I have a hard head. And sometimes it takes more than one or two lessons before something gets through. And I would pull into a beautiful red brick church with this building here and that building there and the gymnasium over there. And I thought, wow, they're going to take a love offering and I'm going to go home with a lot of money for the work in the Czech Republic. And they would give me, well, we don't do love offerings here. Here's a check, and I'd get an honorarium of $75. And driving home, 3 hours to get back home, I'd think, man, Lord, $75. And then, I pulled into this parking lot and saw this little church, and I said, well, Lord, thank you that one of these pastors called me, and it's not this just, plush complex, but this is your work, Lord. And you had a love offering that morning and collected $1,200. And God just reminded me again that this is his work. And every time I tried to flesh it, have my own perspective, God would remind me that there's quite a difference between doing something in the flesh and putting thoughts together based on my keen perception, as opposed to doing something by faith and reminding myself that God is God and that God can do awesome and powerful things. Well, I mentioned through the years that Pastor Marek has been involved with establishing himself about 15 different churches. Marek is gifted as a church planter like no one else I've ever met. And he knows that's where his gift is. After 3 years of getting a church established, he begins to get restless and he will email me and say, brother, there's a few families over in the town of Doobie that have no fellowship at all. And I am praying that God would use me and that God would use you to raise money so that we can rent this little facility so we could gather and begin to meet and to pray. And every 3 years, he would turn the keys over, in a sense, to this new young fellowship, to a young pastor, and Marek would move to another area where he sensed that there was a need and where God was working. So just to share with you what Marek is up to now, he moved to a new area. It's very close to the central portion of the Czech Republic, but very far north, very much near the Polish border. There was no church established in this town, and Marek was helping another church with a certain project about an hour and a half away. And Bonnie and I visited this church, and we both said, Marek, you can't continue to drive an hour and a half to church, especially when you have no fellowship in your town. He said, yes, brother. He said, you are right. And shortly after, we got an email that there was a gathering now meeting in his hometown. And there's now, we just received an email most recently, there's 15 people meeting in the new area. And Marek is really excited about what he's doing. But there's even more going on because his wife had assisted a gentleman, an older gentleman, through the years who had some physical issues, and she would make meals for him. He had no family. He lived in basically this old farmhouse. There were actually a few farm animals, but the house was in terrible condition. And he passed away, and he left this old house and this barn to Marek and his wife. So Marek said to me, brother, he said, I have a new vision. And I thought, oh boy. I said, what's your new vision, Marek, and what's this going to cost me? And he said, we would like to clean up this house, and it needs much, much work. And he said, there are many stressful situations for pastors in our country now. He said, many of these pastors, they function with very little money. They have very little training. He said, we would like to develop a place where pastors and their wife could come and rest and have refreshment and can have spiritual training and input. Now, this little farm was very close to what was a very well-known ski resort in the Czech Republic. And so he said, now we would also like to convert the barn and have lots of bunk beds and have this be like a youth retreat area. So now young people from all over the Czech Republic would come. They would have a winter ski resort area, but they would also have time for training and fellowship and worship. And what a wonderful opportunity that he has now with this farm possibility. One of the other pastors that I've been working with developed actually biblical theological seminary. We had an opportunity to assist him with theological training here in the States. Really a sharp guy. He excelled at Hebrew. His wife, also a Czech woman, excelled in Greek. And they began, along with his brother-in-law, Biblical Theological Seminary. They've had pastors from the West would come and help teaching some short-term classes. I've had the opportunity to be a part of that. Very exciting to see these young men and women, because it was not just pastoral training, but church leadership training. And what a joy it was. Previously, any education that they had theologically was a real hodgepodge. They would go to one class and have a conservative perspective in the Bible, and then they'd go to the next class, and it would completely undo what the first class did. So it was just a mess in terms of consistency and theological continuity. And so for the last 15 years, this theological seminary has been in operation. And he and his brother-in-law, Milan, now travel every Saturday. Rather than having the students come to the school, they go out and they do these training segments so as not to be a burden for these pastors to have to travel to their town. Because many of these pastors already have families, they have jobs, and so it is a great blessing for them to have the teachers come to them rather than them uprooting themselves and going to a new location. They also established a church. This brother's name is Vladja, by the way. Vladja also, along with the seminary, established a church. They had recently their 15th anniversary. It took them 7 years for their first convert. And there was a great deal of discouragement, but they just spent time knowing people and getting to know them and cultivating friendships and relationships. Probably about 1% of the people in the Czech Republic attend church. And that's any church, including Jehovah's Witnesses. So it is a mission field that is really ripe for the gospel, and there is a tremendous need for the gospel to be proclaimed in this hard place. One of the people that came to Christ was a man by the name of Martin. Martin was and is one of the most famous musicians in the Czech Republic. He is a saxophone player. Everyone in the country knows who he is. He is often called to recording sessions. He was hardened to the gospel, and he wanted nothing to do with the gospel, although his wife began attending the church where Vladja was pastoring. And then their son, who was a young teenager, he became a believer in one of the Christian camps that they operated over the summer. And so this man came to Vladja and he said, "I'm very angry at you because you are taking away my family." And Vladja, to the best of his ability, tried to communicate that this was God's leading in their hearts, but he would have none of it. And Vladja said about 6 months later, he called me. And he said, "I'd like to get together with you and have lunch." So they went out, and Vladja said, "I had no idea what to expect. Was I going to be hollered at some more? Was I going to be scolded?" And this man said, "I wanted to let you know that things aren't so bad at home." And he said, "I've noticed things in my wife and things in my son that are good things." And Vladja said, "Well, I'm very happy to hear that." He said, "With that in mind, what do you think about what's happened to them? And could that happen to you?" Nope. I want nothing to do with what they have. I just am here to tell you that it's not so bad. Okay, well, that's good. About another year passed, and he called Vladja again. And he met with Vladja, and he said, if I give myself to Jesus, how much do you think he would want of me? And Vlad said, well, he said, that's a good question. He said, why don't you ask Jesus how much he would want of you? So about a week later, he called Vlad, and he said, I asked the question to Jesus. And Vlad said, it just completely slipped my mind what he was talking about, and then it dawned on me. He said, I asked Jesus how much he wanted of me. And Vlad said, what did Jesus say? And Martin said, he said he wants all of me. And Vlad said, so how much are you going to give? And Martin said, I'm going to give it all to Jesus. And so when Bonnie and I went to the church, he, with much joy, was a part of the praise team. Vlad used to play the saxophone, and now Vlad said to me, I don't get anywhere near the saxophone anymore, not with him around. He said that would really be embarrassing. So he was playing with the praise team in their church service. The next night, we had a meeting with men's basketball. It's a professional men's basketball league. And the owner of the team is a believer. So he invited Vlad and a few of us from that church, myself, we were there at the time. He invited us to come and share my testimony with these boys. And so, you'll notice I'm not, what you would call a tall drink of water, right? So I was looking at these fellas. Now, these were like maybe 19, 20, 21-year-olds, fellas that were not good enough to be in the NBA, but there's professional leagues all over Europe. And I was watching them come into the restaurant that was shut down for this meeting. And I was looking at them as they're coming in. Very nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you, tall boys. And so we shared our testimony that night. And Martin had a smile on his face the entire time. And then he said to Vlad, after there were some questions and answers, he said to Vlad, may I say something? And Martin gave a 15-minute testimony of how, as a musician, he tasted everything that the world had to offer. And he said, you boys are athletes and you play in front of people that are cheering you, and you meet girls and you think you have the world in the palm of your hand. He said, but you do not have any idea of what true joy and fulfillment and purpose is until you ask Jesus to come into your heart. And his English was poor, was non-existent. And I remember every time I was in conversation with the people in that church, there was Martin, sort of not in the inner circle, but around the circle, and he had no idea what was being said, but he just had that smile on his face the whole time. That's my memory of Martin. Lastly, because I think we have just a few minutes left, I wanted to share with you another ministry that Vlad, the seminary, the church, but then there was a third ministry. They opened up a Bible museum. And Vlad collected, as a hobby, old Bibles. And he had stacks of them, and he didn't know what to do with them. And the Lord gave him the idea of opening up a Bible museum in his hometown. And so he and his father went out and found many old Bibles to add to this collection. They purchased old printing presses, and now they have a wonderful museum of the Bible And there are 2,000 visitors that go through the museum every year. Every year, schools take their classes, not so much because they are religious or have spiritual interest, but they see this as a part of the cultural history of the Czech Republic. And when they get to a certain point in the museum, there's 2 photographs, copies of Rembrandt's paintings. Once was the lifting of Christ. The first one was actually the sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis 22, right, Pastor? Genesis 22. The second painting was the lifting up of Christ. And Vlaja at this point explains both paintings, relates the paintings one to another as God will provide a lamb, points to Jesus, presents the gospel, and then gives a free Bible to anyone who would want one as they leave the museum. And he has 2,000 people going through the museum every year. So you ask, where's our money going? Well, these are just a few areas where it's going. If I had another hour, believe me, I could fill it with some of the things that your money has enabled us to do, and most importantly, has enabled the gospel to go further into a world of now open doors, but very hard hearts. And so I can't thank you enough for your investment, and I should have stopped early enough to maybe have some questions, but...
I gotta say something, you say it all. Paul, what year did you guys go to the Czech Republic?
We went 2 years. I think it was 2007, 2008.
And how many were in that team?
The first team, I want to say, was about 15, and then the second one was 3 of us.
Okay, and anybody here today that was with that first team that went? Maureen's not here.
And Nick was there.
Nick was there. Nancy was there. Nancy went too, didn't she?
Yeah.
Or just Nick? Yeah. Well, anyway, we've had several people from our church go over to the Czech Republic twice and to minister there. The thing that impressed me when I met this guy, and he was right, it was not a very warm welcome by the Jersey Shore Evangelical Ministers Fellowship, which I was embarrassed by, but was the fact that here's a way to be a missionary in a country, and you don't have to learn the language, and you don't have to do all the work yourself. Find people that are gifted to do this and support them. Mm-hmm. And the thing that encouraged me so much is 100% of everything that this couple gets goes to the Czech Republic. He pays his own airfare. He pays his own hotel. He buys his own food. He doesn't take any money out of the gifts that are given for the Czech Republic. 100%. Now, there's no mission in the States that does that. They ought to take a little bit for administrative work and other stuff, and some take a lot. But the whole gift goes right to there. And how more effective he is supporting the missionaries that are there, rather than going himself, needing support, and trying to be a missionary there, learn the language. You know, it's just a great example of how to run missions and what to do. And the heart of the people was moved, and they responded with love offerings that were good and helpful, and we've even gotten involved by going to the Czech Republic. Anything you'd like to say before we pay attention to the last bell?
Yeah, it was great.
Good. Okay. Thank you for coming today. We're having a luncheon after the morning service. You'll be able to ask Steve and Bonnie. Oh, by the way, that's Bonnie over there. And Bonnie. And if you get an opportunity, go down to Wildwood Crest and enjoy their hotel. This is how he's able to do it. He has a business, and this is how he's able to support himself and do all that they do.
Can you give out business cards?
Does he give out business cards?
Yeah, can you get one? Not, it doesn't be now, but before.
Yeah, not on Sunday.
I'll get it later.
Okay, you're all dismissed. Go back and ask the Salty Fellowship.